It's a great song. After Cross, I almost picked that one this morning, Brother Malcolm. I'm glad I did. When he's gone, he's going to have to send me his list that he's going to play on Sunday night. So I don't pick those for Sunday morning. Or we'll be singing the same song twice. You lost me? Can you hear me? All right. Am I back on? I'm getting signs from the sound net, so I'm in trouble. Usually it's the other way around. All right, he gave me a thumbs up. I'm good to go. I can preach. I've been back there on the soundboard before. I'll go ahead and tell you, when I was in Bible college, I helped work the soundboard, and I called it a spaceship because the thing was that long. And we were live on the radio, so we had to make sure everything worked perfectly. And they had replaced it while I was in college, and it would act up every once in a while because it was a new board, but some of the other stuff was old, so they didn't work together real well. And yeah, that was real fun when they all decided to quit working in the middle of the service. You're up there trying to figure out what's going on. Yeah, it can be fun being back there at the sound room. But Brother Briar does a great job taking care of that, and all the online things and handling that stuff and getting that going. So we are thankful for all that he does back there. He likes to hide and not be seen. So I'm going to make him known this evening. Well, good to be back here, Mark chapter number 7. And we'll continue looking at this discussion, this topic, as Jesus was talking with the Pharisees. And last week we looked at him speaking directly to them. He was talking about this idea of washing your hands and washing the pots and cleaning up before you eat. And they got all bent out of shape because the disciples didn't do that. And then we had our little dinner afterwards for Brother Billy and Miss Darby and the baby shower. So I stood and watched everybody to see who washed their hands. I did not. But we had it was interesting looking through that, and then we had that same dinner go on, and I thought that was kind of funny, the coincidence that happened. But as we look down through there, we ran into this thing where Jesus is telling them in verse 6 and in verse 7 that these people, you were honoring God with their lips, but in their heart they were far from Him. The Pharisees and a lot of the Jewish people would do actions that would be in their eyes as honoring God, but in their hearts they were not honoring God. They weren't following after Him. And when Jesus said that in verse 6, He really was pinpointing the whole issue. Was in the heart. I preached a message years ago. I think I have it somewhere saved in a file somewhere about the heart of the matter. But I titled it and talked about your heart and how your heart from the inside comes out, and that's the problem. We'll look at that later on in the message tonight. But as we look down through there, Jesus began to give examples to them. He said, you're doing these things, and in fact, you're taking the commandments of God and making them none effect by your traditions. And then he really laid into them in the latter part of verses 9 through verse 13, where he talked about how Moses commanded, God commanded that we're supposed to honor our mother and father, take care of our parents and all those things. And I did that this weekend because my parents are here. In fact, no, not really. My mom, Amanda's helping take care of her grandpa right now. That's why she's not here, some of y'all knew that. And my parents were over this weekend, and I got home and my mom had lunch ready. She was home and she had lunch ready. And I walked up and I said, man, she should come over more often, you know. So when my wife's gone, my mom comes over, Brother Lily, I don't have to make peanut butter sandwiches. You go explore this. But the Bible tells us to honor our father and mother. But the Jewish people found what we called last week a loophole around that. And said, well, I gave all my substance to God, and everything belongs to God, so I don't have anything to give to take care of my parents. And they were using God as an scapegoat, a loophole, around obeying God. And I thought that was kind of interesting. How can you use God to make an excuse around what God told you to do? And if we're not careful, we'll do that. We'll make excuses that, oh, well, I can't do that because of this, or I need to read my Bible more, and so I can't help out and do this, or I can't do that. And we use excuses of God to get around doing things for God. And so we see that in verse 13. Then we get down to verse 14, down to verse 23. And I entitled tonight's message, What Defiles a Man? Question mark. What defiles a man? So I thought, well, let's look at that word defile because we don't use that. How many of y'all use the word defile this week? I might use the two words, the file. Use the file something, but not defile. Some of our pronunciation may be off, and you might think of a different word. But we don't use the word defile much in our English language anymore in our conversations. It's not something that we use often. Brother Billy and I are going to do that this week. We're going to use the word defile all week long. But I looked it up, and then we have the definition there in your notes. And this comes from the Strong's Concordance of the Greek word. And the definition they gave is to make or consider profane ceremonially, and to call common, defile, pollute, or unclean. So this word comes with this idea of being unclean or polluted or common. And we'll look at a passage in Acts in a little bit where that word common is used in the same tense of being defiled. It's unclean, it's not right, it's not holy, it's not just anymore. As I was looking through it, I began to think about, well, where did we get a lot of our teaching of being unclean from? Where did the Jews come with that teaching? Where was that given? In the book of Leviticus has the laws. And as you read down through there, it talks about you can't touch this, and you can't do this, and you can't eat that. And we'll look at a passage here in a little bit about it. But as it goes through there, I thought, well, I wonder how many times the word unclean is used in the book of Leviticus. And in your notes there, it's used 110 times. 110 times the word unclean, and then the word defile or a form of it is used 20 times in the same book. So around 130 times, this concept of being unclean is mentioned. And the Levitical laws give us that definition and show us that the Jews had a lot of things that made them unclean. If it's mentioned 130 times, there was a lot of things that they had to do to keep themselves clean. And if they touched this or they did this or did these certain things, they would be considered unclean. And so as we were looking through here in the first part of chapter 7 with the Pharisees, you begin to get a little understanding of why they were so concerned about the disciples not washing their hands. Because they wanted to make sure that on the outside they were following the laws. We're doing what God wants us to do. We're doing exactly what He has us to do. So let's get down into verse 14 and go down through verse 16 and look at the teaching of Christ. It's just a short little passage here in Mark. It's just 3 verses. And let's look at that this evening in the beginning. It says, "And when He had called all the people unto Him, He said unto them, Hearken unto me, every one of you, and understand. There is nothing from without a man that entereth into him can defile him. But the things which come out of him, those are they that defile the man. If any man have ears to hear, let him hear." So as we look at this passage, the teaching of Jesus here, I put down a couple other references that we'll look at. One is in Leviticus chapter 11, verse 3 through 8. I just picked the passage. There's so many of them as I look through there about things that are unclean. But since Jesus is discussing food, and in this passage he begins to talk about there's nothing from without a man that entering into him can defile him. And we were looking previously in verses 6 down, talking about, or verse 3 down, the Pharisees talking about eating and food. And so Jesus is dealing really with a food matter here. And this is just an example that is being used, that Jesus is continuing to use. But look in Leviticus chapter 11, verses 3 through 8. It talks here about some of the dietary laws, things they weren't allowed to eat, things they were allowed to eat. And as you look through there, it says, "Whatsoever parteth the hoof, and is cloven-footed, and cheweth the cud among the beasts, that shall ye eat." So there was 3 criteria there that they were allowed to eat. And he goes down and continues, it says, "Nevertheless, these shall ye not eat of them that chew the cud, or them that divided the hoof, as the camel." So I'm not really sure anybody would want to eat a camel. I was reading that, and I thought about that. To me, that's like eating a horse. I mean, it's not something I necessarily... If you're going to feed me one, I like to follow Paul's example and ask no questions for conscience sake. I don't want to know what you're feeding me. So if you're going to feed me a camel or a horse, just don't tell me until afterwards, okay? And he goes So that's an unclean thing. And the coney, because he cheweth the cud, but divideth not the hoof, he is unclean unto you. And the hare, because he cheweth the cud, but divideth not the hoof, he is unclean unto you. And the swine, though he divide the hoof, be cloven hoof, yet he cheweth not the cud, he is unclean to you. Of their flesh shall ye not eat, and their carcass shall ye not touch. They are unclean to you. So these are some of the, just a small bit of some of the things that were considered unclean to the Jews. And Jesus is discussing these things. And so he is going through here and he begins to share this thought. And he starts off in verse 14. Jesus calls for man's attention. As we go down through here, he calls for man's attention. If you look in verse 14, he says, and when he had called all the people unto him, so he gathered the crowd together. And then he says, hearken unto me, every one of you, and understand. That word hearken means to listen, to take attention to be attentive to what's being said. And in some instances, we all had some phrase that we probably used to get somebody's attention or our kids' attention when we were growing up. My dad was that. If he snapped his fingers, that meant straighten up and listen because I'm telling you something. Or he may raise his voice. He has a tone, all right? And I know the tone. If I hear that tone, I'll stop and I'll listen because I better. It's not going to be good. And I know what tone that is. The rest of y'all would just not even pay attention to it. But believe me, I'll pay attention to it when that tone comes. And Jesus here, hearken unto me, every one of you, and understand. Listen to what I'm saying and listen carefully. Understand what I'm trying to tell you. Have you ever been taught something and somebody's trying to teach you something and they're trying to get you to understand, to listen to what I'm saying as I instruct you on how to perform this task or how to accomplish this or how to do this or how this is working? Because a lot of us, we get, especially today, we get distracted easily, don't we? If someone's trying to teach you something, it doesn't take very much for us to get distracted or our brains to go off to the side. And sometimes, especially today, I've seen these little clips of people with ADHD brains and their minds are always going and all that, and they have trouble focusing on one simple task and all those things. And that's not an issue, but as you think about it, you're trying to focus on things. We all do that a little bit. And Jesus is here saying, hey, listen and understand what I'm about to tell you. And as we go through this, he begins to share the truth. Let her read in our notes. He shares the truth about what defiles a man. So what makes them unclean? What makes them common as the Jews would look at it? And as you go down to verse 15, it says, there is nothing from without a man that entering into him can defile him. Nothing that you eat, nothing that you take in is going to defile you. The whole purpose of the law, and we'll look at that in a minute here in Galatians chapter 3, verse 22 through 25, but the whole purpose of the law was to show us and be a guide for us, be a schoolmaster, as Paul puts it in Galatians. Look at that passage, Galatians 3, verse 22 through verse 25. It says, but the scripture hath concluded all under sin, that the promise by faith of Jesus Christ might be given unto them that believe. But before faith came, we were kept under the law, which is what we're dealing with here. Shut up unto faith, which should afterwards be revealed. Wherefore, the law was our schoolmaster to bring us under Christ, that we might be justified by faith. But after faith is come, we are no longer under a schoolmaster. The laws here, Jesus was trying to tell the people this, to understand that following the law does not make you right with God, does not make you righteous. You can't work your way to heaven, to be right with God. They were commanded to follow laws, and that was the part, was obeying God and doing what God said. And so as they were going down, he's trying to get them to understand that just eating that doesn't defile them. It's not that, that's not the issue. And then he says afterwards, that second part, it's not what comes in, but he goes on and he says in the second part, but the things which come out of him, those are they that defile the man. It's what comes out of us. It's what we're doing. It's our actions. It's how we, even some of our speech, the things that are coming out from our heart. If you remember back in verse 6 of this chapter, it says, these people honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. It's an outward show. Some people they like to, and I'll just use this as an example. I'm not picking on anybody or anything in particular, just as an example. Some people they'll come to church thinking that if I go to church, that will cancel out all the bad things I did during the week. I've even heard song lyrics of, if I put an extra 20 in the offering plate, that will make up for the bad things I did on Saturday. That's wrong. Doing things and having that form and saying, oh, if I'm outwardly, if I do this, then it makes up for the bad things that I think and that I act upon and all that. And that the Jews were dealing with some of those issues. They were inwardly, they weren't seeking God. Outwardly, they were following this pattern and trying to do good. And so as he goes, he says the things that are within defile man. And then Jesus closes this section of teaching in verse 16. He says, if any man have ears to hear, let him hear. Jesus encourages man to listen with understanding. Spend time and listen to what I'm saying and understand what's going on. Of course, the Jews had the issue of that. We do a lot of times when we want to walk out. We don't want to listen to what's being told to us. Sometimes we don't understand it. We can't figure out what's happening if we're being told how to do a task. Sometimes it doesn't compute in our minds. I'm a visual learner. I like being shown how to do something, not told how to do it. You can tell me and I'll listen, but I learn a lot faster if you just show me how to do it and I can pick it up. That's how I am. But some people can pick up through audio or being taught or read a book or how to do that. I was working on a vehicle years ago, and I was asking my boss how you do a certain task, and he goes, well, we have a manual, go read the manual. And I said, I read the manual, I don't understand the manual. Come show me how to do it. I don't get this. I'm confused by a couple of these things, and he came out and helped me with it. But Jesus says, if you have ears to hear, let him hear. Listen with understanding. Listen to what I'm telling you. Now, as we go on, this is an interesting part. In verse 17, it says, and when he was entered into the house from the people, his disciples asked him concerning the parable. So they asked him about this parable of what comes in. How does that not defile us because of all the Jewish laws that they grew up under and followed after? So how does that not defile a man? Because that's what we were taught. It was probably something along the line of questioning. Verse 18. So here we see their lack of understanding, number 2, verse 17 down to verse 23. And we see their lack of understanding that the disciples had. And as we go down through here, verse 18 says, and he said unto them, are ye so without understanding also? Wow, what a question to be asked by Jesus. So Jesus has a question to his disciples. Jesus' question to his disciples, he asked them, are you also without understanding? Are you without understanding also? In other words, number 1 in our notes is, Jesus was concerned about their lack of knowledge. Are you not understanding what's being taught here? The time that I've spent with you, you're not understanding what's happening. So Jesus begins to ask them some more questions. He asks the second one. He says, do ye not perceive? Now that word there, perceive, it has the idea of, are you not thinking? Are you not processing what's being taught? Are you not spending time trying to understand what's being taught to you? So Jesus is concerned about their lack of thinking. They're not spending time to think and critically look at what Jesus is teaching them. And so he begins to explain it. And number 3 in our notes, this one's a little interesting. I had no better way of putting this at the time, so I put it down. But Jesus has clarification about the digestive system. We're not going into detail, don't worry. All right, we're going to go with what we have here, all right? And we took biology, we understand the digestive system. Some of you understand it more than others. All right, but we're not going to go into detail here. But Jesus says, do you not perceive that whatsoever thing from without entereth into the man, it cannot defile him? And Jesus explains this in verse 19. Look at what he says here. He says, because it entered not into his heart, but into the belly, and goeth out into the draught, purging all meats. Our body cleans those things and deals with it, and we can all go into details. So if you want to know, I'm sure there's some nurses in here, medical professionals, that would be very happy to explain that process to you. Jesus explained that's not what defiles you. Your body takes care of those issues. It deals with, I created it to deal with these problems. That's not what's defiling you. And then he said in verse 20, so we have this clarification about the digestive system. Letter B in our notes, Jesus explains the defilement here in verses 20 down to verse 23. He says here in verse 20, that which cometh out of the man, that defileth the man. Verse 21, he begins, so the things that come out of a man's heart, verse 20 and 21, from within, out of the heart of man proceeded evil thoughts, and we'll go through this list here in a minute. So it comes from the heart. It's what comes out of our heart. You really want to know somebody, you want to get around them for a little while and start really paying attention to them. Because what's in here comes out in our actions, it comes out in our talking, in our conversations with one another. That's when we really learn about people. Put somebody in a high-stress situation, you'll learn how quick their fuse is. Put somebody in a sleep deprivation time period, and you can really learn. Sometimes ugly things come out during sleep deprivation. Travel with somebody across the world. Go to the other side of the world with somebody. Travel with them. I've had the privilege of traveling different people around the world. Brother Billy and I went to Fiji years ago together, and on a survey trip and trying to get some of the paperwork done. If some of y'all remember that. And that was our first time ever. I think that was the most time we'd ever spent together in a long period. And I learned something about Brother Billy. He does not like traveling. He was so antsy because we had to wait for the plane. And he has very little patience for waiting on airplanes, I'll tell you that. And apparently when the airplane lands sideways and the wing tips over, he doesn't like that either. I don't know why. And we got, this was my favorite part of that whole trip. We got to Fiji and we had been traveling, I don't know, 16, 18 hours. It was a long time. And we had rented a car and drove around to the capital city. It was a 4-hour drive around there, and I was driving. And we got to the capital, and I said, "Are you hungry?" He said, "Yeah." And I knew where McDonald's was. I knew how to get there. And I said, "Well, let's go to McDonald's and we get something to eat." And so we went through the drive-thru because we were trying to find where we were staying because GPS wasn't working too well. And so we were trying to find where we were staying. So I said, "Let's just go through the drive-thru." And we did. I pulled in. I said, "What do you want?" And he told me, he said, "I want a quarter pounder with cheese and a sweet tea." And I looked at him. I said, "They don't have sweet tea." He was taking me back to the airport. So you really want to know somebody's heart. You want to know who they are, travel with them. You'll find out real fast. And that's what Jesus is bringing out, is what's within us that defiles a man. So let's look at this defilement. He gives an example of the things that can defile a man in verse 21 down through verse 22. And we have a list of them here, and I'll try to go through them semi-slowly so that we have time to write down the empty blanks. But first off, he says that proceed evil thoughts. From our hearts, that's where those thoughts that come in, we all have them. They all come in our mind at points, and we have to stop and go, "Lord, take that away. Get that out of my mind." We have to get away from that, because if we continue to think on that, it starts coming out. It comes out in our lives, comes out in our actions, comes out in our speech and how we interact with one another. So those evil thoughts come out, that defiles a man. Then he goes on to say, idolaters and fornications and murderers. And we know what those are. Adulterers, those having relationships outside the marriage, and the fornication, that's before the marriage, and all of those. These are things that are defiling a man. These are actions that come from the heart. In all of these things, there's things that begin. They're not just snap decisions. These are things that have been thought of. These are things that have been in the heart for a while. We never dealt with them. We never looked at them. We never pushed them away. We never got rid of them. And they came out. And then he goes on to say, murderers. Verse 22 begins the rest of the list. He says, thefts, stealing. And most of us, I don't think, steal, unless you're stealing time. That's an easy one to steal. If we're not very careful, we'll steal time from our employer. We'll steal time from God. We'll steal time from other things, from our families, from our spouses. We won't spend time with them that we should. If thefts can happen, we think of theft as somebody breaking into our house and stealing our stuff. But theft is other things as well. We have to be cautious of that. Covetousness, I have that one down as a blank for you. Covetousness, that's probably a big one for us. How many of us covet things? We want something. Oh, I want that. And we covet it to the point that we get greedy and we try to take it or get it from somebody else. We have to be very cautious with that one. Covetousness. Wickedness, just being generally wicked. That comes from inside of us. Our sin nature, that's where that comes from. And then he goes on and he continues on. He gets a little personal here. Deceit. Being deceitful. Boy, that one really sneaks out. Even as a Christian. That one is easy. We all get a little deceitful. Because we get a little selfish. And that's when the deceit comes out. Because we begin to devise ways of getting things to go our way. And we deceive people. And make it work to our benefit. Doesn't matter how it turns out, as long as it turns out my way, right? I've heard people say that, I don't care how that goes, as long as it goes my way. And we have to be so cautious of that we don't become deceitful in our actions and our words, how we talk to people, and manipulating things into our way. We have to be very cautious with that. And you know what? That starts from here. That's a hard issue. It comes out in our speech and our actions, how we treat people, and how we respond to them when they bring things up to us. So we have to be very cautious that we're not deceitful towards others. And then he goes on to lasciviousness. That's a hard word to say. Basically, it means lust. If we're being lustful and having that wicked mind in that area and looking toward lewdness is another word that describes this. But being lustful in our actions and our thoughts and our responses. And an evil eye, having an eye for sin, looking for sin. People do that. We know that. We see that all the time. But how about other Christians? How about our own hearts? You know, when I read these lists, this is me personally, when I get to these, and you say, well, he's just talking to the Jews and the disciples. Well, you know what? This is me too. And I go down through this and I begin to look at my own heart and my own life and say, wow, is any of this coming out in my life? Do I have any of these issues? And I begin to ask the Holy Spirit to work in my heart and to show me if I have issues in these areas. But he says having an evil eye, constantly looking for ways to sin. Looking for sinful things, having an eye for it. Boy, that's a bad place to be. But once again, that begins in the heart. Because we begin to think that sin nature comes up, and we begin to think about these things, and we begin to dwell on them, and then they begin to come out in our life. And that's what Jesus is trying to point out to the disciples. He goes on to talk about blasphemy, and I hope nobody in here has blasphemy as an issue, but it is. It comes from the heart, going against God. Talks about pride being an issue of the heart, coming out of us. That's a really bad one. Pride really, really can destroy a lot of things. It can destroy a church. It can destroy relationships. It can destroy your life. Being prideful in the things that you're doing. And I think there's some times where, you want to be proud. Look, I'm proud of that I accomplished this, but when we allow pride to rule our lives, be overly prideful, pride goes before destruction, as Solomon says in the book of Proverbs. So we have to be very cautious that we don't let pride become a ruling factor and let it come out of our lives. We need to be very careful with it. And then the last one he mentions is foolishness. Oh, yeah, that one hit. I ain't going to point fingers and name names, but, we get a little foolish sometimes, don't we? If we're not careful. Some of y'all are nudging people. It says, and I looked at the word foolish because I was like, well, I need to look that up to make sure I have a good definition for being foolish. So in your notes there, it means senselessness or reckless. All right, sometimes we all get a little bit foolish, don't we? And I don't know exactly if that's dealing with all of our little actions that we do, or just dealing with the heart and we get reckless in our lives and things. Because I've done some foolish things in my life, I'll tell you that right now. I've dealt with people foolishly before. I've handled my life foolishly before. I've taken senseless risks. I've done reckless things. And you have to be careful with that when I'm telling myself. Many of y'all know my stories. You know what I was like when I was a little younger. And some of y'all looking at me a little younger, you still do it. We have to be cautious about our foolishness and be careful with it, that it doesn't become a problem. But these are things that come from within. It's what comes out. We become foolish with our life, with our actions, with how we deal with people. And we need to be cautious about that. In verse 23, Jesus sums it up. He said, all these evil things come from within and defile the man. And he's bringing the point home. He's driving it into the disciples' minds. It's what's within. It's not the outward appearance that defiles the man. It's from within. The Jews got so caught up in the laws and we have to follow them that it became an outward showing, and they lost sight of the fact that it's from the heart. You know, it's really easy to follow God when we love Him and we want to please Him and we want to be His children. And we learned this morning that as a Christian, we're a child of God and we want to please our Heavenly Father and we want to follow after Him. When our heart's there, our actions follow. But when our actions are just doing it, our heart's not there, that's the wrong way. It's going the wrong direction. I remember seeing a little sign when I was in Bible college, and it said, you catch him and he'll clean him. I thought, that's a pretty good saying. You catch him, he'll clean him. God cleans, the Holy Spirit cleans up our heart. And that shows on the outward appearance. If we're not careful, we get so focused on outward actions and emotions and doing this and doing that and showing this and everything. And it looks good on the outside, but what about the inside? And it was interesting to me. I was reading through this afternoon, getting my mind refreshed on it, going through it. And the thing that caught my mind the most about this was as you look through Jesus talking about this heart matter and this outward appearance and the showing forth outwardly and not dealing with the heart matters. And you know who he's really talking to here? Who were the people that came to him with this issue? It was the Pharisees. You know, the Pharisees were the religious leaders. They were the examples. They were the ones that people were looking up to. And I thought, man, how many times, if even as preachers, as missionaries, different leadership in a religious setting in the church, a lot of them, if they're not careful, can start showing this outward appearance with their hearts in the wrong place. That's a dangerous place for them to be. And we have to be so cautious that we as people, as children of God, we don't let the outward traditions that he was discussing about, the outward things, overrule so much that our heart's not in the right place. And it's just like, well, I got to go to church because it's Sunday morning and that's what we do on Sunday morning. Well, I like going to church because I want to be around God's people. I want to hear from His Word. I want to grow and learn more from Him. And this is a place to do it. I want to get away from the world for a little while. Take a break from it. Quit hearing all the things out here and letting all this worldliness soak into my life. I want to be able to get away from that for a little while. And this is a nice safe haven to be able to do that and to spend time talking with my fellow brothers and sisters in Christ and be encouraged by them and listen to their life and be able to pray for them. All those things helps me to grow closer to Him. But if we're just doing it just because, okay, I got to get that done, knock it off my list as a Christian, I did this action, or I did that, or I did this, and then our hearts are in the wrong place. And Jesus is dealing with that with these men. And what a challenging passage. I know he's talking to the Pharisees here, but boy, it really touches my heart. It really dives into my life and makes me look at my own life and say, do I have any of these issues in my life? Am I outwardly showing, but inwardly my heart's in the wrong place? What a challenge as we look through these passages in Mark chapter 7. Looking forward to the next section as we go down through it and finding out more as Jesus teaches and heals and goes on through His ministry. But what a challenging passage tonight to look at. Well, let's bow our heads in the word of prayer. Lord, thank You for this